Jelly's Donuts was as close to sacred ground as I had in Willock, a town small enough that everyone knew the grocer's son just got braces. The old shop, as homey as the apple fritters they served, was a bastion of comfort nestled amongst the weather-beaten clapboard houses and white picket fences pretending to hold the years at bay. I, Officer Danny Ramirez, was partaking in this sanctum of caffeine and confection alongside my partner, Officer Angela Mitchell. "The best apple fritters in the world, Danny," Angela said with a sigh of contentment. Her eyes were half closed in reverence for the treat. She had that sort of demeanor, holding on to every moment like it was a holy moment. Angela was an eager cop, a real by-the-book type, as if each page of the manual had been engraved into her heart. I liked her, even admired her. Still, to me, it was just a donut. I took another slurp from my coffee cup. Outside, the warm June breeze carried the delicate scent of blooming roses, an overture of summer in all its glory. The sight of children splashing in the town's fountain, their laughter filling the air, brought a smile to my face. My eyes wandered over to the waitress, good old Sally. Over the years, we'd come to appreciate her near telepathic timing for refills and her knack for remembering every detail of our donut preferences. Our casual banter with her about the upcoming summer fair was abruptly interrupted by the crackle of the radio. With one hand firmly on the frosted lemonade she'd just placed on the table and a playful roll of her eyes, Sally guessed, "Stanley again? He really needs to stop watching those paranormal shows." As she was saying this, dispatch broke through the static. "Unit 13, we have a 1062. Disturbance reported at the Weatherby Mansion. Mr. Stanley Roberts, caller. He'll meet you there. Over." Stanley, quirky old bugger. The type who saw a conspiracy in every crossword and a UFO in every cloud formation. And the Weatherby Mansion. One of the oldest buildings in Willock. It had been abandoned since I was a child. Heck, it had probably been abandoned even when my grandparents were children. Angela placed her napkin on the table, smoothing it out with unnecessary precision. "Probably another raccoon, or maybe Puddles is having a tantrum again," I said, referring to Stanley's pampered poodle. The glimmer of intrigue in Angela's eyes told me that she didn't share my dismissiveness. She enjoyed these kinds of calls, the thrill of potentially tackling something more than a neighborhood squabble or a teenager speeding. It was infectious in a strange sort of way. "Oh well, Stanley, Puddles, and a whole lot of nothing, here we come," I said as I sighed and downed the rest of my coffee. I plonked a few crumpled bills on the table and got up. We stepped out into the muggy summer air, the scent of burnt sugar lingering as we closed the door behind us. Willock was a sleepy town, often more dream than reality, but the charm was undeniable. The old wooden signpost outside Jelly's, faded by the elements and peppered with bullet holes from decades of local teens proving their marksmanship, was an emblem of our tranquil existence. But I had a feeling as I slid into the squad car and Angela revved the engine, that tranquility might not be on the agenda for tonight. "Unit 13, confirm receipt," dispatch's always calm voice asked. Angela's hand shifted from the steering wheel to the handset, and in her best, "I was top of my class" voice, confirmed, "This is Unit 13, we got it." The tires crunched on the gravel as we eased onto the road. We rolled past the Willock Gazette, its windows reflecting back the last of the afternoon sunlight. The town stretched out ahead of us like an oil painting of Main Street America, with its Norman Rockwell storefronts and a population that clocked in at less than 1,000. Whitewashed fences and sunflowers on every corner. The scent of freshly baked bread from Sarah's bakery often wafted through the streets. Kids left their bikes outside the library, and the high school football team won every game they played. All idyllic enough to be downright suspicious. The Weatherby Mansion, huh? I thought you said that nothing ever happened there. Angela's eyebrows arched with a hint of surprise as she eased on the gas. Yep, I can't remember ever getting a call there, I replied. Probably just another raccoon or a vagrant looking for shelter. It happens all the time. I shrugged and continued. I mean, Stanley's probably gotten himself spooked by raccoons again. Remember the demonic chittering last month? A laugh escaped Angela. Yeah, I do. I chuckled. It was good to have a partner who could appreciate the absurdity of our routine calls. As we wound our way through town, the sun began to dip and the streetlights began to flicker to life, casting long, ominous shadows. The mansion itself sat brooding at the end of a cul-de-sac, the rotting patriarch of a once respectable neighborhood. It had been boarded up and unloved since before I was even a twinkle in my dad's eye. Even kids, always itching for a scare, steered clear of the place. Not from fear so much as just disinterest. It was really odd when you thought about it. But there it stood, a grim sentinel, an impenetrable mystery behind its plywood armor. You know, it's strange, isn't it? I found myself saying more to myself than Angela. What's that? She replied, her eyes scanning the road. The mansion, it's been abandoned for forever. And yet, no graffiti, no broken windows, not even the kids messing around. For a haunted house, it sure doesn't attract much attention. Angela turned to me, a flicker of interest in her eyes. Maybe it's because the real ghosts don't need to advertise. The cul-de-sac had seen better days. The few other houses were respectable enough, if a bit worn. But the mansion? The grandeur it must have once held was now replaced by an air of menacing decay, its once opulent features worn by time and neglect. Quite the charming place, isn't it? Angela deadpanned, her eyes scanning the dilapidated exterior. I shot her a lopsided grin. We could always try knocking, see if they offer afternoon tea. As we stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway, an uneasy silence greeted us. The only sound was the gravel crunching beneath our boots and the low murmur of our radios. The mansion loomed before us, an ancient behemoth frozen in time, forgotten by the world. Stanley Roberts stood nervously at the end of the overgrown driveway, his poodle Puddles a ball of nervous energy at his side, whining and casting fearful glances towards the mansion. He was a quirky sight, Stanley, slight and a little stooped, but today he seemed even smaller against the backdrop of the imposing structure. "Officers!" Stanley called, waving us over. His face was ashen, his eyes flitting nervously between us and the mansion. "I'm glad you could make it. There's something not right about this place today." Angela and I exchanged a glance. "Hey there, Stanley," I greeted as we approached. Angela nodded her acknowledgement, her sharp gaze sweeping the scene like a hawk eyeing its territory. "What seems to be the trouble?" Stanley gestured towards the mansion with a trembling hand, his poodle echoing his agitation with a whimper. "It's the mansion, officers. Lights, shadows, noises. I've seen them all these past few nights while walking Puddles. Strange stuff, officers. I mean, it's not natural." Then, with a nervous glance at the mansion, he added, "And today, the front door, it's open." The three of us turned to look, and sure enough, the mansion's front door was ajar. For all of my life in Willock, all the times that I had seen the mansion, the door had always been boarded up with planks. But now, The door stood open. Something about it was ominous. Angela's eyebrow shot up. "That's unusual, especially for the Weatherby mansion." She turned to me. "Danny, I'll do a perimeter check." Her voice held an edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As Angela moved to investigate, I continued to converse with Stanley, trying to gauge if what we had here was genuine terror or the overactive imagination of a retiree with too much time on his hands. Yet, even as I questioned him, my eyes were drawn back to the front door of the mansion. It stood partially open, and the boards were nowhere to be seen. If it had been vandals or kids, I would have expected the boards to be left on the porch. And if it were burglars, I would have expected them to use the back door. Something was definitely odd here. And with that, I realized that this time, Stanley might actually be on to something. I felt oddly disturbed by the sight. The house had been shut up since before I was born. Well, I guess someone had finally broken in. I patted Puddles, my fingers getting lost in the cloud of white fur. "Well, Stanley, we'll check it out," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice. "Thanks for calling us." "No problem, officer. I'm glad to help," Stanley said. Stanley, shivering slightly, tugged Puddles' leash. "Well, I'll leave you officers to it. Come on, Puddles," he said, resuming his daily walk with the white puffball nervously darting around his feet. As Stanley made his way home, dusk began its creep, draping the eerie mansion in an ominous shadow. A cold breeze swept across the neglected grounds, stirring the dead leaves into a ghastly dance. We had been called out for strange reasons before, but something about the mansion felt different. Angela returned from checking the perimeter. Her eyes had a more severe look. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. "Property's secure," she said. "No signs of a break-in or squatters. Nothing's off, other than the door." There was a moment of pause as we both regarded the mansion's entrance. The soft sighing of the wind was the only sound accompanying the dying day, the sunlight giving way to creeping shadows. "We should get in there before it gets too dark," Angela suggested. She was right. The darkness would only add another level of complexity to our task. As we approached the open door, I felt my heart drumming a steady tattoo against my ribs. Not out of fear, no. A Ramirez doesn't scare easily. But something was certainly unsettling about this call. And in the dimming light of dusk, the Weatherby mansion seemed more menacing than ever before. Stepping inside, I could feel the air thickening around us, carrying an ancient chill despite the summer heat outside. The foyer of the Weatherby mansion stretched out before us. The fading grandeur of an era long past seemed to bleed through the peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. The ornate moldings, though darkened with age and coated in a thick layer of dust, whispered tales of past opulence. The beams of our flashlights spilled over a grand staircase, a chandelier ensnared in cobwebs, and portraits, the figures within them staring down at us with disapproving eyes. The entire mansion bore a spectral gloom, amplified by the last rays of the setting sun piercing through the grimy windows. We started with the ground floor, our footfalls on the wooden floor echoing like gunshots in the silence. Each room held its own relics of the past. A grand piano with yellowed keys, moth-eaten drapes, furniture shrouded in white cloths like forgotten specters. We didn't find anyone. Nothing was out of place, as far as we could tell. So it was on to the upper floor. our flashlight beams leading the way. At the top of the stairs, we were faced with a long hallway lined with closed doors. Angela approached the first door and opened it. She froze as her light revealed a children's room. Dolls with blind eyes and faded dresses sat on dusty shelves, staring down at us like unblinking sentinels. We searched the room and there was no one there. As we continued on, we found bedroom after bedroom, and again, they were all empty. We headed down the back stairs, and as we reached the ground floor again, Angela pointed out a concealed stairway leading down. "Oh, there's a basement," I muttered. I walked over and looked down it. The darkness below felt tangible, consuming the beam of our flashlights. I forced a smirk. Ladies first. Angela led the way down, her focus unwavering. The air grew colder, damper as we descended. The basement was surprisingly expansive, the flickering shadows playing tricks on our eyes. We heard nothing but our own breathing, echoing around the stone-cold walls. There was nothing to suggest the presence of an intruder, supernatural or otherwise. Remarkably, the basement was largely empty, just a few empty crates. We finished our search and headed back up the stairs. As we emerged from the basement, a strange silence had draped itself around us. It felt like the house was holding its breath, the only sound being the distant ticking of a forgotten clock somewhere within its bowels. "Well, that was a fun tour," I said, forcing a chuckle as we made our way to the front door. But the humor tasted stale in the face of the intimidating mansion. Something felt off, but I shrugged it off, reminding myself that it was just an old house. "Stanley's gonna owe us a round of donuts for this one," Angela muttered, and I found myself smiling, despite the oppressive feeling of the air. "Yeah," I agreed, the echo of our combined relief bouncing off the cold stone walls. "He definitely owes us for this one." As we reached the foyer, I took another look around. As far as I knew, we were the only two people to see the inside of this mansion in years. So I thought I should probably try to drink it in just a little bit more, even if I did find it distasteful. That's when I saw Angela's face change, her gaze fixed on something behind me. I turned following her stare, and that was when I saw it. The front door we had entered through was now inexplicably barricaded with plywood. A cold shiver creeped down my spine. "Darn kids," I muttered, my voice sounding less sure than I intended. But even as I said it, I could feel that it was something more. Something wasn't right. "So, what do you reckon, Danny? Teenagers messing around? Squatters, maybe?" Angela's voice broke through the silence. We had just thoroughly searched the mansion, so even though we were sure that it was just us in the vast mansion, she had lowered her voice instinctively. I pulled on the wood planks that covered the door. They were firmly attached. The fact that they had been placed over the door with no warning, no sound, well, it was disturbing and, well, weird. Angela joined me and pulled harder on the planks. The door was nailed shut, and good too. We spent a solid few minutes examining it, trying to figure out how it had been put up so quickly and quietly, and trying to get the planks down. "I bet we can get one of the other doors open," Angela said, her flashlight cutting a path towards the back of the house. Then we heard it. A low, scraping sound echoing from the rooms behind us. Both of us spun around, Angela's flashlight carving a path through the darkness. There was nothing, just an empty hallway filled with shadows and silence. We continued on, pushing through the musty, stagnant air. The sound came again, this time from upstairs. This was our chance, our pranksters making a run for it. Adrenaline surged through me, my grip on my flashlight tightening. We made our way upstairs, our boots thudding heavily on the ancient staircase. Just as we hit the top of the stairs, a shadow flitted across the far end of the hall. Angela gave me a knowing look and we charged, sprinting towards the disappearing figure. We surged down the corridor and rounded a corner, only to see it dart into a room at the far end of the hall, the door banging shut behind it. We raced towards it and smashed through the door. The room was empty. There was no furniture in the room. There were no escape routes, no hidden door. There was a window firmly shut and boarded over, and a small vent, but nothing anyone could get through. There was no way out. We checked the room thoroughly, pulling back the dusty drapes, poking our heads into the lonely closet. There was no sign of the lonely figure. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. That's when the cold reality dawned on us. The figure we had been chasing hadn't been a kid. No, it was too big, too tall, too looming. I glanced at Angela. Her normally fierce eyes held a glimmer of fear. We were both officially creeped out. Shaking our heads and trying to clear the fog of confusion, we returned to the hallway. The house was quiet now, silent except for our own heavy breathing. We decided to head back downstairs. If there was anyone else in the house, they weren't upstairs. But where had the figure gone? When we reached the base of the grand staircase, we stood there, our hearts pounding against our ribs like frantic drummers. We traded a look of unease. "Let's, get out of here, Angela," I said, the words dropping into the silence like pebbles in a well. The house swallowed the sound, reducing it to a mere whisper, as if the very walls were mocking our futile bravado. "Yeah, let's try the back door. Maybe it'll be easier to get out," she said. I agreed, and we headed down the hall. I turned to the corner first, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness, the light bouncing off the walls that had forgotten what daylight looked like. Then I froze. At the far end of the hallway, the figure loomed, large and dark. It filled the doorframe, its form vague yet horrifying. A chill swept up my spine. Its eyes glowed, two orbs of malevolence providing the only source of light at that end of the corridor. "Police!" Angela's voice rang out clearer and louder than I had thought possible in this forsaken place. Her flashlight joined mine, throwing an eerie illumination on the figure. "Put your hands where I can see them," she commanded, her authoritative tone betraying no fear. Neither of us was a stranger to strange occurrences. Willock had its fair share of eccentricities, and we had faced more than a few oddities during our patrols. But this was something else. The figure remained motionless, its silence as chilling as the malevolent eyes that stared back at us. Angela and I unholstered our service pistols in unison. My grip tightened, knuckles turning white. We advanced, our steps cautious but determined. The figure came more into focus as we moved closer. The beam of our flashlights revealed a monstrous apparition, a hideous parody of a man. Its features were warped, distorted, not too monstrous to be human, yet not quite human either. Cloaked in a fashion so antiquated that it looked like a nightmarish rendition of a vintage portrait come to life. A sense of revulsion seized me as the figure's features registered in my brain. Its skin appeared shriveled and corpse-like. Its mouth, a distorted slash on its face, twisted into a ghastly smile. As my mind spun in panic and shock, a small part of me refused to believe what I was seeing. It was too surreal, too bizarre, like something out of one of those old Hammer horror films that I had watched as a kid. But the icy dread gripping my heart reminded me that this was all too real. As a lifetime resident of Willock, I was no stranger to weird occurrences. The whispered tales of specters and ghouls. But as a cop, I had learned to regard such stories with a skeptical eye. Normally, there was nothing to them. But there, facing a creature that defied logic and reason, I felt my skepticism waver. It was terrifying. A shiver of fear tingled down my spine as I realized that we were not dealing with human mischief makers or even an ordinary squatter. This was something otherworldly. Something that had stepped right out of the darkest corners of folklore and into the grimy, decaying reality of the Weatherby mansion. The figure didn't respond to our shouts or warnings, but it didn't have to. Its mere presence screamed volumes louder than our shaky commands. We trained our weapons on it, preparing for, well, we didn't know exactly. We inched closer, our flashlights casting sickly shadows on the gaunt, monstrous figure ahead. Like I said before, its clothes were antique, like something out of an old photograph. An oversized suit that had seen better days, covered in dust and mildew. The cloth sagged off its skeletal frame, adding to its ghastly appearance. Suddenly, it felt as if the walls were closing in on us, and the figure seemed to grow even larger, filling the hall with its grotesque presence. My heart pounded, and I could hear Angela's breathing, shallow and rapid. I could almost taste the fear in the air, a bitter tang that caught at the back of my throat. My palms were slick against the grip of my service pistol, my fingers threatening to slip. The figure remained still, silent, watching us with those glowing, predatory eyes. It was a tableau straight out of a nightmare, the stuff of haunted dreams and half-whispered ghost stories. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But we were cops, and we had a job to do, no matter how surreal the circumstances. There was nothing to do but see it through. After all, Willock depended on us. As absurd as the situation was, we were all that stood between this unknown horror and the sleepy tranquility of our little town. As we crept forward, the monster's smile grew even wider, showing a mouth full of fangs. Then it started to move. I'll never forget the unnatural way the figure hovered towards us, like a spectral marionette. It began to bear down on us, menacingly alien and oh so terrifying. We yelled for the thing to stop, but it continued to move steadily towards us. Angela and I fired. Bullets whistled through the gloom and vanished into the figure, like stones cast into a midnight lake. As the rounds hit the monster, it suddenly disintegrated into what is best described as a black mist, almost like ash. The mist moved as if blown by a strong wind and dissipated quickly. My heart pounded in my chest, the drumming echoing in my ears, drowning out the eerie silence of the mansion. Relief and disbelief washed over me. The relief was momentary, quickly replaced by adrenaline-fueled panic. "Where did it go?" Angela said, her voice a taut whisper echoing in the stillness. Her grip on her gun tightened. I was about to answer when an unholy hiss echoed from the other end of the hallway. We turned in unison. The figure had reappeared, looking even more menacing now, if that were possible. I won't lie, I screamed. Not a manly shout, but a real, full-blooded, I want my mama kind of scream. With wide-eyed terror, we shot at the figure again. And again, it vanished. Bullets, it seemed, did have some effect, I guess. A loud crash from upstairs sent a cascade of dust and debris raining down on us. I heard the thump, thump, thump of something heavy making its way down the grand staircase. We did what any self-respecting officer would do in a horror movie. We ran. Throwing ourselves into the first door we found, Angela locked it behind us. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were filled with a hard determination. The locked door felt like a flimsy cardboard shield against whatever we were facing. A door lock isn't going to hold that thing back, Ange, I said, hoping my fear wasn't as obvious as it felt. Okay, well, you got any other bright ideas, Danny? She spat back, training her gun on the door, just as a monstrous thud shook it and echoed in the room. I looked around, desperate. My eyes landed on a set of old wooden chairs. I rushed forward with a speed born out of desperation, and I grabbed one of the chairs and swung it into the window. The brittle glass shattered easily under the blows, sending shards raining down onto the floor. The stubborn planks of wood on the outside, barring our escape, were another matter entirely. Angela turned to help, and we worked together, hands slick with sweat as we wrestled with the stubborn barricade. Plywood's not supposed to be this tough, Angela grumbled, her nails scraping against the old wood, desperately trying to pry it loose. The monster's assault on the door continued, the wood creaking and groaning under its relentless onslaught. There was a grim inevitability about it, like listening to the slow tick of a time bomb. With a loud crack, the door began to buckle. Angela turned back to the door, took careful aim, and fired through the weakened wood. A guttural scream echoed from the hallway, and the attacks on the door abruptly stopped. Couldn't dodge those, could ya? She spat defiantly, a grim satisfaction in her voice. No sooner had the words left her lips than we heard the eerie scrape of something dragging down the hallway. Then, the black mist started pouring from the bullet holes, seeping in like a deadly fog, diffusing the beam of our flashlights. Before our eyes, the figure materialized. The cloud of black swirling mist condensing into a solidity that twisted the stomach. It was as if someone had painted an obscene portrait using only the color of night, and then they gave it a pair of radiant, blazing eyes that shone a bright red. As the mist continued to gather, the silhouette began to regain some of the features of the creature from the hall. They were much worse up close, particularly the gruesome smile. Angela froze at the sight, her fingers tight around the grip of her pistol. Suddenly, something sparked within her, and she was back to normal. Her finger slipped off the guard and to the trigger. Simultaneously, a thunderous screech split the air and our eardrums. Then the figure flew towards Angela. The primal sound echoed in my head, each reverberation sparking another wave of terror. Angela! My voice, strangled and frantic, bounced off the mansion's ancient walls. I saw her fingers squeeze the trigger, the flash from the muzzle bright against the figure's dark form. But she missed. I grabbed the remaining old chair and I hurled it at the monster. It hit, sending the monster stumbling to the side. Its form wavered, a misty ripple spreading across its surface before pulling itself together once more. In that split second, Angela was moving, adrenaline outpacing fear. She darted past me, making a break for the window. I turned, following her lead. The sounds of the creature's enraged screech created a discordant symphony of horror in my ears. I jumped through the window with less grace and more speed than Angela. The sensation of falling, then the rough bite of the ground against my palms, jarred me back to reality. I pushed off the ground, barely aware of the dull pain in my hands, and stumbled towards the cruiser. In the corner of my eye, I saw Angela, her gun reloaded, covering the window. She had my back, like always. We reached the car and piled inside, slamming the doors closed. I had taken the driver's seat this time, and as the engine roared to life, my hands fumbled for the gear shift. I threw the car into reverse and we jolted backwards. The headlights illuminated the house. There, framed by the broken window and decaying wood, the figure watched us. It was just a silhouette against the murky interior, but I felt its icy gaze on me. As we reversed down the street, tires squealing against the asphalt, the figure slowly retreated back into the shadows, disappearing from view. We drove around Willock for a while, pretending to patrol before heading back to Jelly's, where we remained until our shift finally ended. The next day, the sun rose on Willock like it had a point to prove. Bright, unrelenting, and painting the town with shades of yellow and gold that stood in stark contrast to the spectral pallor we had seen the night before. I was behind the wheel this time. Angela was riding shotgun. Both of us were silent. We were the walking definition of shell-shocked, nursing our psychological wounds and warily eyeing the world outside like it might suddenly turn all goosebumps and shivers on us again. It was a little past 9, a time when the world should be normal, sane even. Our shift had just begun, and we had decided that we should probably check on the Weatherby place, and that the best time would be when there was still plenty of daylight left. As we pulled onto the dead-end street and parked, the Weatherby mansion loomed in the distance. We both stared at the mansion. The once open door was now mysteriously boarded up, just like old times. Sturdy planks of wood were nailed perfectly straight across the entrance, and the window that we had escaped through was no longer broken. It was boarded up too. It was somehow, mysteriously, like we had never gone through it, like we had never even been in the house. Who do you reckon did that? I muttered, my gaze fixed on the window. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Do you think we should get a closer look? I asked. Angela looked at me like I was insane. Do you want to go to Jelly's? At this, Angela smiled. Yeah, that's a good idea. Just as I put the cruiser into drive, Stanley ambled into view, puddles waddling at his feet. The sight of the little man with his comically oversized hat and tiny dog would have been laughable if it weren't for the unsettling events of last night. He saw us and headed towards us. I rolled down the window. "Morning, Stanley," I greeted, forcing a smile onto my face. Good morning, officers," Stanley replied, adjusting his hat and offering a toothy grin. His eyes flicked to the mansion and back, a slight furrow creasing his brow. "What did you two find?" he inquired. "We wanted to talk to you about that, Stanley," Angela said, her professional demeanor in stark contrast to Stanley's nonchalance. "It might be best if you and Puddles, Steer clear of the mansion for a while." Stanley squinted at us, clearly puzzled. "Why should I do that?" We had a bit of a situation there last night," I said, choosing my words carefully. Just keep your distance, okay?" Stanley regarded us for a moment, his gaze sliding back to the mansion. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "All right then, officers. Me and Puddles will give it a wide berth." He tipped his hat and continued on his morning walk, Puddles trotting obediently by his side. And with that, we headed off to Jelly's. All of this happened a few weeks back. We haven't gotten any more calls to the Weatherby Mansion, and I'm glad, because I'm never going back there again.